Now, there are many things in wrestling that make me much sadder, I think, than knowing that there are some people out there in the WWE universe who will never have actually seen a match by Eddie Guerrero. Fortunately, however, there are a lot of people who did manage to enjoy the brilliance of Eddie Guerrero, and you will know that he is one of the best wrestlers to have ever done it. And he's a guy who had range beyond range. This is a man who had multiple facets of the business in his arsenal, and he could do them all incredibly well. You want comedy? Eddie could make you laugh. You want anger and intensity? Latino Heat had plenty of that too. You want a technical masterclass? Well, look no further than one of the greatest technical wrestlers to have ever laced up a pair of boots. And that is a sentiment that still holds up some 15 years later since his tragic passing in November 2005. But with legend and legacy comes questions and comes speculation and comes about the tales perhaps that maybe were untold within the wrestling industry. Behind the scenes in particular, Eddie was a complicated man. He had many things going on in his life, and there are a number of questions that potentially remain unanswered in his career. My name is Adam Nicholas, this is What Culture Wrestling, and these are the 8 most notorious Eddie Guerrero urban legends. Number 8. He hated Kevin Nash. Now, as the story goes in this one, Eddie Guerrero is supposed to have legitimately hated Kevin Nash due to their time they spent together in WCW. It's no secret that WCW's mid-card clan that consisted of the likes of Eddie Guerrero, Chris Jericho, Dean Malenko, and Chris Benoit, to name a few, all felt like they were being smothered and held back by an upper main card like the likes of the NWO, who completely had the monopoly over WCW at the time. Now, in fairness, the NWO was, of course, the hottest thing in wrestling for quite a period of time, but by 1998, it was starting to wear a bit thin, and the likes of Eddie and Chris Jericho and Chris Benoit had designs of wanting to be main event players, and they just weren't getting those opportunities because the NWO was just stopping it all from happening. As a result, a lot of the WCW mid-card guys ended up leaving the company out of protest. We all remember the Radicals and Jericho moving across to WWE at that certain time, but one thing that Eddie Guerrero seemed to really dislike about Kevin Nash was his coining of the term vanilla midget. Writing in his autobiography Cheating Death and Stealing Life, Eddie would say the following about Kevin Nash: "Considering how little talent he had in the ring, Nash is one of the most arrogant people I've ever had the displeasure to know. He'd walk right past you and not acknowledge your presence unless he thought there was something he could get out of you. I don't say this lightly, but I genuinely feel that Nash is evil." So is this one true? Well, you better believe it's true. Yes, it is. In fact, this is the only time really in Eddie's book that he actually speaks bad about anybody, which should tell you everything you need to know about Kevin Nash in that regard. And I think even more so to the fact it still kind of hurts him that someone like Nash would even go as far to say that Eddie and Chris Benoit winning the World Heavyweight Championship and WWE Championships in WWE was the day that wrestling died. Number 7. He intentionally put in a poor performance at ECW One Night Stand. Now, this pay-per-view already had a lot of hype coming into it. There was a lot of matches on that card that people were looking forward to, and this was bound to be a classic. These two knew each other so well. They had great rapport. They were obviously going to put on a match to tear down the house, right? Well, wrong, unfortunately, because it seemed like something wasn't quite right that night. Eddie was a bit off, and he seemed very distracted by all the stuff that was going on in the crowd with the likes of Eric Bischoff and Edge as they were interfering, and the fans, well, they just weren't really paying attention to what he was doing. Now, while you can understand the crowd's reaction probably was quite annoying, to be honest, apparently the story goes that Eddie was a little bit upset about all of this. He wasn't so happy that he was going to have to do the job on the night because he was just coming off the back of this amazing heel run, and so in the match, he decided to underperform on purpose in protest. So is this one true then? Well, I guess the only two people who are ever really going to know are Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero. What we can come to, the summation we can make, is that we can just go off what we saw, and this match kind of underperformed to a point where it was very noticeable. Eddie Guerrero at the end of the match even said to Chris Benoit, if you could read his lips, "I owe you one," and there was a noticeable tension between the two, and apparently backstage they had heated words afterwards. So while we might never know for definite, it seems like there's a few good indicators here. Number 6. He invented the frog splash. There's a lot of speculation that Eddie Guerrero was in fact the man who invented the famous frog splash, the one that now almost everybody in WWE currently does because it's a great move and because obviously in tribute to him. But did he come up with it? Was he the guy who invented it? Now, many people believe that Eddie's tag team partner in Los Gringos Locos, Art Barr, was the one who came up with the frog splash, and that Eddie ended up adopting it as his own move after Art's death in 1994 as a tribute to him. But actually, Art Barr was the one who ended up borrowing it from Eddie while they were together. So actually, not the case. But despite all of this speculation, according to Eddie's own words, the move itself actually comes from the 1980s famous Mexican wrestler La Fiera, who he took it from, was inspired by, and he is the first person that Eddie says ever did the move. And in fairness, said that between him and Rob Van Dam, they were the ones who did the best looking frog splash. Number 5. He was supposed to wrestle Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 22. Now this is an urban legend I can get behind. Shawn Michaels versus Eddie Guerrero. That is a match that would have blown everything else out of the water surely at this time. You've got two guys who are possibly two of the best in-ring performers of all time. Brilliant wrestling, incredible stuff they can produce, two amazing characters. I mean, what more can you ask for? That is money. And incredibly, to this point, these two had literally never faced each other before. Imagine that. Not a singles match, not a tag team match, not a six-man tag, nothing. They hadn't even thrown a few punches at each other in a Royal Rumble. So, I hear you ask, was this one true? Well, it seems like it might have been, because Bruce Pritchard was apparently the first person to pitch this match to Vince McMahon, and he absolutely loved the idea, and this was confirmed by Court Bauer, a former WWE writer, on an MLW interview in November 2013. And on that MLW radio show interview, Court Bauer said, Eddie being the heartthrob in Mexico and this mercurial figure south of the border, and the American version being HBK. They had never really worked, and you would have had such a great dynamic between the two, with Eddie being the heel and Shawn being the face. That'd be your tear the house down, high quality match at WrestleMania 22 in Chicago. Vince was like, God damn, that's really appealing. We could parallel their careers. What kind of footage do we have outside of WCW? We could really do some impressive packages with this. In the end though, as true as this might have been, it's a real shame we never got to see it, because that would have been a classic. Number 4, he died in the ring. Now this one is a little bit out there, because apparently, as the story goes, the legend amongst fans is that Eddie Guerrero had a heart attack in the ring and he died there, and WWE have covered it up in a way. What? Now yes, as stupid as this one sounds, I guess we'll explore it because it does sort of video evidence to support it if you really want to get into it. Because in a 6-man tag team match between Eddie, Rey Mysterio, Rob Van Dam, the Dudley Boys and JBL, Eddie ended up collapsing in the middle of the ring and looked like he needed medical attention and wasn't able to carry on. So that was something that played into all of this, and people believe that that was maybe the moment that this happened. Now the explanation for this collapse wasn't because of a heart attack, this was because of the amount of blood that Eddie Guerrero lost, and him being weakened by the fact that he had a match a few nights previous with JBL at Judgment Day, and he was defending his WWE title, and it all got a bit bloodsheddy, if you remember correctly. Now in fairness, Eddie was legitimately weakened by this bout and had to take a few shows off to actually recover fully, because let's be honest, he lost a lot of blood in that match, man, covered from top to bottom. Go back and watch it, he was like a complete sheet of claret. But is this one true? Of course it's not true, god damn it. Number 3, WWE hired Eddie Guerrero because they felt responsible for Eddie's death. Now in the weeks leading up towards his death, Eddie Guerrero was worn down and he was tired. The wrestling business had taken a toll on him, and his wife Vicky had said as much, said that he was struggling to sleep, and that because he couldn't sleep he was feeling ill all the time and just wasn't able to recover, and he was doing a lot of work. The man was completely burned out. The truth of the matter here really is that Eddie Guerrero had been feeling like this for a very long time, but didn't want to take any time off because he was worried that he was gonna lose his spot in a company that breeds that environment. You can kind of understand it, to be honest. And Bob Holly actually tells a heartbreaking story about how Eddie was so messed up at this point and so physically hurting and in pain that he would just sit backstage, lie backstage and just wait around until he had to actually do something. He was in that much pain, he could barely move. Now it goes without saying that Eddie was an incredibly well-liked guy and respected guy in the locker room, and everybody seeing him like that must have been terrible, and to see that the company aren't offering him time off at that time can only make matters worse. This would end up leading eventually to his death and unfortunate passing, and from that point, WWE would then end up hiring Eddie Guerrero, who went to do an on-screen role for the company, because actually Eddie had kind of left them in a bit of a financial predicament, and it was a way of helping her out of that. So is this one true then? Well, it's kind of hard to say really, because Vince obviously would have had this in the back of his mind. This was something he was aware of. Whether he felt really responsible, partially responsible, we don't know. But what we do know is that as a result of Eddie's death, we got the WWE wellness policy, a direct response and reaction to that happening. So that was a situation that was being addressed. Whether or not he gave Eddie Guerrero a role in the company as part of that too, we don't exactly know. but it doesn't seem like that much of a stretch. Number 2, he died due to steroid abuse. So the prevalent theory in this one is that Eddie Guerrero's tragic death was as a result of his alleged abuse for many years of anabolic steroids. Now, Eddie Guerrero was obviously 5'6". He's a guy who ended up attaining a lot of muscle mass and putting on a lot of weight in order to try and look like the big star, because that was the pressure he was feeling to try and get Vince McMahon's attention so he could be the main guy in the company. And a lot of people attribute that to alleged steroid abuse because it makes sense, I guess. It fits the bill, and there were a lot of guys who were doing that at the time, allegedly. Now, after Eddie's death, there was invariably a lot of discussion and speculation as to whether or not steroids had played a part in his heart attack, because ultimately it came from him having an underlying cardiovascular disease, and the amount of times that people can try and connect the dots between steroids and heart attacks is quite often, to be honest. Add to that an article in March 2007 by Sports Illustrated, who named Eddie as one of a bunch of names in the wrestling industry to have bought HGH, human growth hormone, and it doesn't make for great reading, admittedly. But is this one true? Well, there's a lot of factors in this. You can't just pinpoint it to one thing. Eddie had a history of being a bit of an abuser when it came to drugs and alcohol, so they could well have played a factor, as well as if he was or wasn't using steroids. These are all things that could have come into it. So whether you can just solely put it down to steroid abuse as the reason of his heart attack, I don't think you really can, to be honest. There's too many variables, but ultimately it feels like there could be more things at play here than just steroids. And number 1, with a bullet. He was supposed to win the World Heavyweight Championship the night that he died. Now, the last of these urban legends centers around Eddie Guerrero's triple threat match that he was scheduled to be in against Batista and Randy Orton, in a match that could potentially have seen him win the World Heavyweight Championship. Now, from Eddie Guerrero's perspective, this would have been a great opportunity for a bit of redemption, to be honest, if it did indeed come to fruition, because his 2004 run as his own admission was a bit miserable, bit of a bad time for him, to be honest. He could have the best matches in the world, but he wasn't quite prepared for the mental stress that came with being a champion. In a time that SmackDown had lost Kurt Angle and Brock Lesnar, Eddie was left with mid-carder JBL to try and make some magic, and as a result you kind of saw a time where pay-per-view ratings and TV ratings were starting to plummet, and Eddie cracked under the pressure. Now, while his reign as champ ended after just 5 months in 2004, by the time 2005 came around, Eddie Guerrero was about ready to be the champ again. He was a guy who'd had time to learn from his mistakes and felt primed and ready. He was red hot at the time, and he seemed like the perfect guy to take the belt from Batista, who needed to go off with an injury of his own. So on November 13th, 2005, WWE were going to hold joint SmackDown and Raw tapings where there was going to be a match, as we mentioned, the triple threat match for the World Heavyweight Championship between Eddie, Batista and Randy Orton, and the speculation is that Eddie was going to win that match. But is it true? Well, unfortunately, as great of a story as that is, it just doesn't seem like there was any truth to the matter. Randy Orton was scheduled to win that match, and perhaps maybe Eddie and Orton could have gone on to have a feud, but ultimately Orton was the direction that the company wanted to go, and that seems to be where the match would have ended up. And any other speculation about this was squashed by Batista in his own autobiography, when he said that he was in fact lobbying for Eddie to be the one to get the belt next, but Eddie in fact said to him, "Look man, don't worry about it. Randy's the guy and Vince knows what he's doing." Despite all the company had done from him and asked from him and sort of put on him and his body, he still kind of felt like he knew what was best for business, and he could see it and was a company guy. So there you have it. Those are all of the most notorious urban legends about Eddie Guerrero that we could find on a list and put together for you. As always, there'll be some we missed and some you probably know that I might not know. So let us know all your thoughts in the comments down below. Don't forget to like and share. Hit the old subscribe button if you haven't already. You can find the original article for this at whatculture.com/WWE. You can follow What Culture on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE. You can follow me on Twitter if that's your thing at It's Adam Nicholas, or if you just want some more videos, you should be able to find some just over here. I've been Adam Nicholas. This has been What Culture Wrestling. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.